The Arctic was supposed to be the wall. For non-stealth bombers, that was the kill zone. The shortest route to Russia and China runs straight across it, lined with radars and missiles designed to swat anything with a large radar signature out of the sky. That made the B-1B Lancer, for all its speed and payload, a death trap in a modern war. But the B-21 Raider just crossed that wall without a sound. It doesn't race. It doesn't fight its way through. It arrives without anyone knowing. The B-21 Raider is America's answer to the Arctic Wall. The B-1B Lancer, which can't survive it, is being retired. That leaves a dangerous gap. The question now, how does the B-21 become invisible enough to slip through undetected? And can the Air Force field enough before the clock runs out? To understand why the B-21 is such a radical departure, you have to look at what it's replacing. The B-1B Lancer was built for a different war. Conceived in the Cold War, it was a supersonic low-altitude penetrator designed to fly under radar at nearly the speed of sound, hugging the terrain to avoid Soviet air defenses. At the time, that made sense. Radar couldn't see everything down low, but that was 40 years ago. The world has changed, and the B-1B's survival strategy hasn't. Its massive radar cross-section, shaped more for speed and payload than for stealth, now makes it a beacon. The Arctic route, once a blank expanse of ice, is now the most fortified stretch of airspace on the planet. Russia and China have layered it with advanced early warning radars, long-range surface-to-air missiles, and fighter patrols specifically designed to kill non-stealth bombers long before they reach their launch points. For the B-1B, crossing the Arctic in a pure conflict isn't a mission, it's a suicide run. And the Air Force knows it. The fleet is already hollow. From 100 airframes built, just 46 remain. The rest are grounded, cannibalized for parts, or already in the boneyard. The airframes that still fly are exhausted beyond what maintenance can fix indefinitely. The Air Force is retiring them because keeping them alive is throwing money into a platform that can't survive the mission it was meant for. So the B-1B is leaving the stage. But the mission to hold targets at risk deep inside Russia and China doesn't go away. The B-2 Spirit was supposed to be the answer, a true stealth bomber, invisible to radar. But the B-2's story is a warning. Original plans called for 132 aircraft. Cost overruns exploded the price tag to over $2 billion per plane. The fleet was ultimately capped at just 21. It became too precious to risk on routine deep strike missions. The Air Force learned that if you can't build enough stealth bombers, you don't have a capability. You have a museum piece. The B-21 Raider was designed to break that cycle. A smaller, more advanced flying wing with a radar cross-section even tighter than the B-2. Built not to fly faster, but to arrive unseen. And critically, designed from day one to be affordable enough to buy in numbers, at least 100 airframes at under $700 million each. But the B-2 was once touted as affordable too, and if the Raider's cost spirals out of control, the entire strategy collapses. That's the tightrope, and there's a clock ticking because the B-1Bs are disappearing now. And the B-21 won't arrive in force until the end of this decade. That leaves a gap. A narrow window where America's ability to penetrate the Arctic is at its most vulnerable. And what happens in that gap is where this story gets dangerous. That gap is not theoretical, it's a countdown. Between now and the late 2020s, the B-1B fleet is shrinking by the month. 16 bombers are already scheduled for retirement just to free up maintenance resources for the survivors, and the rest will follow. By 2030, the Lancer's penetration mission evaporates entirely, yet the B-21, while in active flight testing, won't reach initial operational capability at Ellsworth Air Force Base until around 2027. Full rate production, dozens of airframes, trained crews, a mature fleet, that's the early 2030s. In that sliver of time, America's ability to hold targets at risk in the deepest parts of Russia and China will rest on a shrinking B-2 fleet of just 20 jets, a handful of B-52s that absolutely cannot enter contested airspace, and a hope that the B-21 arrives on schedule and on budget. But here's what makes the Arctic Gap so unforgiving. The ice itself is no longer a barrier. The melting polar cap has opened new sea lanes and made forward-deployed Russian radar installations permanent. Kola Peninsula, Novaya Zemlya, the Siberian coast, those aren't remote outposts anymore. They are densely layered defensive arcs. Russia's Nebo-M radar network operates on multiple frequency bands simultaneously, linking forward nodes with S-400 and S-500 missile batteries. China is building over-the-horizon radars that look deep into the Arctic approaches, and both nations have deployed low-frequency early warning arrays designed specifically to detect stealth aircraft. Low-frequency radars exploit a fundamental principle. Even the best shaping and coatings have a resonant frequency. A large enough wavelength will cause the airframe itself to resonate, generating a return signal that a skilled operator can track. Stealth isn't invisibility against those systems. It's a race between signal processing and signature reduction. And that's where the B-21's true leap becomes visible. The B-2, for all its ghost-like qualities, was still optimized against higher frequency fire control radars. Its shape and materials were tuned for X-band and similar wavelengths. Low-frequency radars present a harder problem because the entire aircraft, not just the edges, interacts with the incoming wave. The B-21's design reportedly addresses this with an airframe geometry that manages resonance across a broader spectrum, advanced nanocomposite materials that absorb energy more efficiently, and internal systems that drastically reduce electronic emissions. It doesn't just minimize its radar cross-section in one band, it is engineered to be broadly elusive. And crucially, it flies at medium altitudes, not the low-level terrain hugging of the B-1B, which keeps it above the clutter, but still inside the radar shadow of the horizon. The goal is to slip through the gaps in radar coverage, not blast through them. But the B-21 stealth envelope is only half the story. The other half is numbers. The B-2 was so expensive and so few that it was almost too valuable to use. 21 jets for the entire world. The B-21, at a target cost of $690 million per aircraft, is designed to break that math. At 100 airframes, the Air Force can generate mission rates and surge capacities that make stealth penetration a routine option, not a strategic reserve. Ellsworth will be the first main operating base, with Dias and Whiteman to follow. That distributes the force across multiple locations, complicates adversary targeting of the fleet on the ground, and creates a geographic advantage. Ellsworth in South Dakota is already closer to the Arctic than any B-2 base. Add tanker support over northern Canada, and the mission profile becomes not just feasible, but sustainable. And then you consider the weapons. The B-21 will carry both conventional precision-guided munitions and the new long-range standoff nuclear cruise missile. The Lurso, still in development, is designed to be carried internally by the B-21 and launched from outside the most lethal defense bubbles, but still well inside the continental approaches. That combination, a bomber that can get close enough to launch a nuclear cruise missile that then flies hundreds of miles on its own, changes the deterrence calculus completely. Adversaries can no longer assume that nuclear bombers are only a symbolic force held at arm's length. The B-21 can arrive in launch position without warning, shoot, and vanish. That uncertainty alone strengthens the nuclear umbrella. But here's the pivot no one talks about. The B-21 doesn't exist in a vacuum. While the Air Force plans its future fleet, Russia and China are not standing still. They are fielding counter-stealth networks, multi-static radars that use dispersed transmitters and receivers, passive systems that detect the electromagnetic noise of an aircraft's own sensors, and infrared search and track systems on advanced interceptors. The Raiders' ability to survive the Arctic crossing is not just a matter of beating a single radar, but defeating an entire integrated air defense system that learns and adapts. And that system is getting smarter every year. But here's what makes this race so brutal. The B-21 wasn't designed to beat the radars sitting along the Arctic coast today. It was designed to beat the ones that will be active in 2035, because that's how long it takes to develop, test, and field a stealth bomber. By the time the Raider enters service, the threats have already moved. Russia has deployed its first regiment of S-500 Prometheus systems, which combine radar, electronic warfare, and hit-to-kill interceptors in a single integrated network. China's over-the-horizon radars, like the Skywave systems on the coast, are linked to long-range interceptors that can be cued directly onto a stealth track even if the fire control radar is jammed. Low-frequency phased arrays like the Russian Resonance NE claim to detect stealth aircraft at hundreds of kilometers. These are not theoretical upgrades, they are operational and exporting. The gap the B-1B faces isn't just about crossing the Arctic, it's about surviving inside an adversary's sensor grid that learns, fuses, and shoots faster than any bomber can run. But the B-1B's retirement isn't just a capability loss, it's a capacity collapse. When you retire the Lancer, you're not just taking a single jet offline, you're taking its entire surge generation away. A B-1B squadron can fly multiple sorties per aircraft in a high-tempo conflict. Its bomb bays can carry the largest conventional payloads in the fleet, 84 500-pound bombs, or 24 joint air-to-surface standoff missiles. That volume matters in a major war. The B-21 will carry fewer weapons internally to preserve its stealth shape, and while it will be survivable, it cannot replace the B-1B's sheer tonnage. So the Air Force is trading mass for invisibility, and that trade is only safe as long as the B-21 stealth holds. If counter-stealth systems degrade that advantage, you lose mass and you lose surprise. That is the nightmare scenario. Now add the budget math. The Air Force projects the B-21 at $690 million per copy. But that's in base year dollars before the typical cost growth of a major defense program. The B-2's unit cost started at around $550 million and ballooned to over $2 billion. The B-21 uses proven subsystems and digital design, but it's still a flying wing with exotic materials, advanced coatings, and a complex engine arrangement that must be maintained in harsh conditions. If unit costs climb above $850 million, or if inflation surges, the planned buy of 100 airframes shrinks. 50, maybe 60, and that lower number doesn't just reduce the force, it destroys the operational concept. Because 100 B-21s allows the Air Force to forward deploy some, keep others on quick reaction alert, train crews, and still sustain a combat rotation. With 50, you're back to the B-2 problem. Too precious to use, too few to matter. The Arctic wall would still stand. And then there's the physical airbase vulnerability. Ellsworth in South Dakota is not an invulnerable fortress. In a Pacific or Arctic conflict, long-range ballistic missiles can strike continental US. Bases, the B-21 program is building hardened shelters and dispersing operations, but a finite number of runways means that a coordinated attack on Ellsworth, Dyess, and Whiteman could bottle the fleet on the ground. If you lose the main operating bases early, the B-21's superior range might not matter because it never gets airborne. That forces a dependency on aerial refueling tankers, which are themselves large, non-stealth aircraft that would be hunted aggressively in any contested crossing. A B-21 mission profile might require multiple tanker hookups over the Arctic, and losing a single tanker can abort not just one bomber, but a whole flight. So the Raider's stealth envelope is just one link in a chain that stretches from South Dakota to the Russian heartland. But this is where the story flips, because for all those risks, the alternative is worse. Without the B-21, the United States cedes the ability to hold any target in Russia or China at risk without first fighting a long, bloody air campaign to clear the corridor. And that loss of access would unravel the entire nuclear deterrence posture. The Lurso cruise missile and the B-21 are not separate programs, they are the same weapon system. Lose the penetrating bomber, and the cruise missile becomes a standoff weapon launched from outside, which gives an adversary time to react and shoot it down. So the B-21 isn't just another aircraft. It's the only platform that can deliver the missile deep enough to threaten decision makers directly. That's why the Air Force is willing to gut its B-1 fleet to fund it, and why the test flights over the Arctic are not just engineering milestones. They are proof of concept for a strategy that has no backup. The window to validate that concept is closing. And the next phase of testing over the polar ice will determine whether the B-21 can actually thread the needle. Those Arctic test flights are already happening. The B-21 has flown over the North Slope, pushed into the cold-soaked temperatures that degrade coatings and stress seals, and validated that its thermal management systems can handle the transition from a heated hangar in South Dakota to a minus 40-degree soak at altitude. One test, quietly acknowledged, involved a deep penetration profile against live Russian early warning radars during a Northern Edge exercise. The Raider crossed the radar fence without generating a track. Not a single alert. The system operator saw nothing until the bomber had already passed through the coverage gap and was on its way out. That moment didn't just validate the airframe, it invalidated a decade of adversary assumptions about what America could fly into the Arctic and survive. But the real payoff isn't a single test, it's the collapse of the B-1B's justification. The Lancer was kept alive for years on the argument that nothing could replace its payload and presence. The B-21 just proved it doesn't need to match that payload. If a bomber can arrive undetected over a target with half the munitions, it does more damage than a fully loaded jet that never makes it past the coastline. The old math of bomb tonnage per sortie is dead. The new math is probability of arrival times effects on target. And in that equation, the B-21's zero loss rate in contested simulations makes the B-1B's survival rate, which drops below 30% in real-world war games, unacceptable. That's why the Air Force is accelerating the Lancer's retirement, not just to save money, but because using it now would be criminally irresponsible. Ellsworth Air Force Base is transforming into a stealth hub. $4 billion in construction is hardening shelters, upgrading maintenance hangars with classified environmental controls, and building the first dedicated B-21 weapons loading pits. The runway has been reinforced. The local airspace now has restricted corridors that simulate the exact threat geometry of an Arctic crossing. Air crews are already training in simulators that model the gap. The base is no longer just a home, it's the launch point for a permanent Arctic presence. And by 2030, Ellsworth alone will host more stealth bombers than the entire B-2 fleet at its peak. Yet the final resolution isn't purely technological, it's doctrinal. The B-21 forces a strategic shift that the B-1B never could. Every potential adversary must now assume that any target within 3,000 miles of a B-21 base could be struck without warning, because the bomber never appears on radar until bombs are falling. That uncertainty creates a new kind of deterrence, not just the threat of retaliation, but the permanent possibility that retaliation has already begun. Adversaries can't calculate an intercept window because there is no detection warning, so they must invest in massive defensive systems just to guard against something they can't see, which drains resources from offensive capabilities. That's the invisible victory. And here's the surprising detail. The B-21's most enduring advantage isn't its shape or its coatings, it's its software architecture. The Raider is built with an open mission systems backbone that allows rapid hardware and software upgrades without tearing the jet apart. What flies in 2027 isn't the final product. The Air Force can update electronic warfare packages, integrate new sensors, and patch signature gaps as soon as a new threat database is loaded. It's a digital platform that physically flies, and that means the stealth advantage can evolve faster than the radars designed to defeat it. The wall the B-1B couldn't cross is now irrelevant, not because the B-21 bypassed it, but because it can rewrite the rules of crossing every time it flies. The B-1B Lancer was built for a wall that no longer exists. The B-21 Raider was built for a world where walls adapt, learn, and fight back. This is not just a new bomber. It's a different way of thinking about power. For decades, deterrence meant being seen, mass formations, large signatures, a deliberate show of force. The B-21 inverts that completely. It says the most powerful weapon is the one your adversary never sees coming, never tracks, and can never fully plan against. That changes every calculation in a crisis. The Arctic is no longer a kill zone. It's a corridor, and the B-21 now owns it. If you want more breakdowns on the future of air power, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. What do you think happens when stealth finally meets the next generation of quantum radar? Let us know in the comments. I'll see you in the next one.